So thanks again, Deborah, and welcome everybody to the September session of BusinessWise Insiders. As usual, given that we have a large number of attendees, I'm going to keep everybody on mute during the duration of the presentation just to minimize disruptions and keep things moving smoothly. But of course, a big part of Insiders is the opportunity to interact with and learn from each other. So at the end of the presentation, we'll split into breakout rooms where you'll have a chance to introduce yourself, ask questions, and offer your insights with peers in our three markets, as well as some of our wise guys. And as usual, you can always ask questions in the chat window, and we'll either address them during the presentation if we have time, or if not, we can talk through them in the breakout sessions. So with that, let's turn to today's topic, which is sure to elicit strong feelings from pretty much every sales rep. And it's the new rules of cold calling and how to build a smarter approach to phone prospecting designed to generate results in 2021. Now, we've been giving the new rules of cold calling presentations for several years, and a big part of what we've tried to convey is the importance of maximizing efficiency with your phone time and demonstrating value to your prospect over the phone. And you'll see those same themes throughout today's presentation. However, this latest presentation also seeks to address some trends that started before the pandemic, but that have been accelerated by the events of the past 18 months, specifically the shift toward email, social, and other digital forms of prospecting that many believe will and should displace cold calling from its time-honored spot among the most employed and recommended prospecting methods. So this is a timely topic for a number of reasons, and I hope everyone comes away with a new perspective on when and how cold calling can work for you in today's sales and prospecting environment. So let's start from that premise that in the world of automated email prospecting sequences and social media, that the act of picking up the phone, dialing a stranger, and looking to set an appointment on the spot is increasingly made to seem outdated and ineffective. And I'm sure almost everyone here has heard or read something about how cold calling is dead, or that it doesn't work anymore, or that it only works when you warm up a prospect using other methods. And in that environment, you can't blame sales reps for asking some of the questions here. Is cold calling worth my time and energy? Will prospects take my calls and be willing to talk? Is cold calling as effective as other prospecting channels? And the bottom line, does cold calling really still work? But there's a force that underlies each of these doubts that I want to address right off the bat, and it brings us to our first new rule, which is don't let fear of cold calling hold you back from engaging in it. So let's quickly go back to the questions from the previous slide, and on the face of it, these are all legitimate questions to ask, especially as cold calling has gotten harder and with so many other prospecting channels available to today's reps. But think about it for 1 second. Couldn't you ask each of these questions about every prospecting method? Email, networking, referrals, social media. Isn't it true that all of these things have gotten harder in recent years? And if we agree that that's the case, then that leads us logically to two important truths. The first is that cold calling gets singled out as a failed strategy because sales reps don't like to do it. Or to put a finer point on it, they have a fear of cold calling and have more excuses than ever not to do it. Sort of more simply put, people are uncomfortable calling strangers and talking to them in a synchronous mode of communication. And then second, if it's more difficult than ever to reach prospects using one given prospecting method, then it's sort of counterintuitive to handicap yourself by completely removing one of the tools in your toolbox. You need more tools, not less, to successfully reach and engage prospects and set first-time appointments. So instead of searching for reasons not to cold call that aren't really valid when you inspect them a little closer, let's look at some very good reasons to continue cold calling. The first one is cold calling is direct. And I recently read about a LinkedIn post where somebody asked sales reps what their ideal prospecting sequence would be using some combination of phone, email, social media, or an in-person visit. And his point was that the phone should start your sequence because if the person who answers your call agrees to a meeting, then you don't need a sequence at all, you're done. And unlike email and social media, cold calling is what we call, as I mentioned, synchronous. You interact with your prospect in real time. as opposed to asynchronous, where you send a message and then wait for your prospect to reply on his or her timetable and so on. So then the second and third concepts here are related. The first is that cold calling helps you build confidence. Successful sales requires human interaction. A large majority of them at the beginning of the process are going to be uncomfortable. And if you limit yourself to the comfort of those asynchronous prospecting methods, you're never going to build the confidence you need to offer honest advice to your prospects or clients, to tell the things they need to hear but may not want to hear. So third, and conversely, cold calling helps combat fear. Most of us have that innate fear of confrontation and rejection, but confrontation and rejection are baked into successful prospecting. It's just a fact. You can't take them out. Confrontation is essential because most prospects won't make a change without being shown why their current path is unsustainable. And rejection is essential for the same reason. Prospects will almost invariably resist until you give them a reason to say yes by demonstrating the unique value you offer. And cold calling forces you to confront those realities and to embrace them rather than run from them. And then fourth, and most importantly, just like every other prospecting technique, it's true that cold calling is destined to fail if you're doing it the wrong way. But if you do it right, it can work just as well or better than other methods, especially in certain situations. Okay, so how do you do it right? And again, two of our top level guidelines here are to maximize efficiency in order to give your prospects a reason to say yes. And a big part of achieving those critical aims is to make cold calling a key component of a more robust biz dev strategy and to focus on setting appointments as opposed to selling your product. We'll talk about more of the details about how all that fits together. But first, I just wanted to invite Deborah to add any thoughts here at the outset.
Well, Sam, you referred to the death of cold calling, which I suppose is better than the a prediction of the death of cold callers, or we would be long gone at Business Wise. But when I look at those articles that have to do with the death of cold calling, it seems to me that most of them are written by marketing companies or SEO folks or companies that are offering opportunities for emailing, etc., because they're trying to promote their particular strategies. Well, we're believers in all of those strategies, particularly the ones that are working for you. I don't think that because those other strategies work, I certainly agree with what Sam was saying, that we don't want to eliminate cold call.
That's right. And I think, ironically, cold calling helps those other prospecting methods succeed and vice versa, which is something we'll cover throughout this presentation. But let's turn to our second rule. And I've already mentioned cold calling efficiency a couple of times. And when it comes to efficiency, by far the most important efficiency tool, more important than any improved cold calling script or automation technology, is the list of prospects that you're starting from. But before I get into smart list building strategies, I want to make an important point about efficiency. And this is something that applies to efficiency across the board when we're talking about cold prospecting. Efficiency does not and should not mean figuring out how to automate the work of cold calling or any other prospecting method so that you don't have to do it. All prospecting requires you to put in work and to learn strategies for how to prospect more effectively. So efficiency is really about ensuring that that hard work doesn't go to waste and that your effectiveness takes center stage and delivers the maximum results. And again, crafting a strong call list is by far the most important place to start. So the idea of taking time to craft a targeted list may seem at first glance to be inefficient because it takes time and energy that could be spent on the phone. And as we'll discuss later, it is important to spend the majority of your cold time on the phone talking to good prospects, but it's really hard to overstate the efficiency gains you achieve when you start with a list of your best prospects. And those are, by definition, the ones who stand to benefit from what you're offering. And at a very basic level, that means using demographics as a starting point to identify potential new clients. And there's no wrong answer here. It all depends on your own business and targets. Then you can further refine it by qualifying for psychographics, asking your clients why they bought from you to identify prospects with similar challenges, priorities, or non-demographic characteristics. And then these lists, also known as target markets, they're not static. They need to continue to be refined as your client list changes and as the business landscape evolves. But your cold calling list and your general prospecting list are often two different things. And there are ways to make your cold call list even sharper to better set yourself up for success. So here's one example. Imagine you have an automated email prospecting campaign running here on the left, where you're targeting a list of 5,000 of your top prospects. That list size is set and you've filled it with your best 5,000 prospects, maybe from the demographic criteria I mentioned on the previous slide. Now that you know you're reaching those 5,000 best prospects with an automated campaign that requires basically no ongoing effort from you other than responding to the replies, you can use your cold call time on the right here to focus on a much tighter set of your absolute best prospects. So if you assume 3 to 7 dial attempts to reach a prospect, when you're working with a target market of several thousand, you can see how many calls that would take to reach your list. So rather than call 5,000 prospects once, would you rather call 100 prospects 10 times or 50 times? So you've effectively created two lists here tailored to your prospecting method, and your cold call list in particular is extremely tight and suited to your purpose. So just a few key points here to recap the concept. You may save a little time by just diving into cold calling without much regard for who you're calling, but you'll immediately waste any time that you saved by spending time talking to prospects who are very unlikely to benefit from what you offer. Even better, a focused list allows you to make multiple calls to your best prospects, and persistence can mean the difference between a missed opportunity and one that leads to a relationship. And then finally, part of what makes a good list is more than just knowing your prospect firms in a given industry. It's the names of the decision makers and how to reach them, both on the phone and over email. Your list won't mean much if all you have is prospect firm names or even just phone numbers, and you can never get through to a decision maker and no one ever calls you back. So having those multiple channels to touch your prospects is critical to a good list. Deborah, did you want to add anything?
In today's world, it's very rare that there is only one decision maker at a firm. So there are many decision influencers, and having those different names and having opportunity to reach different people at those firms can make a big difference in your outcome.
Thanks, Deborah. So let's use our next rule to talk a little bit more about efficiency, or how to be smart with your cold calling time. So you've already taken a big step by crafting a list of those highest value prospects. And now let's talk a little bit more about how to approach that list. So the old rule told sales reps to be tenacious with their prospects, to view every single one as a potential appointment, to view giving up on that appointment as inexcusable failure. But is it smarter to do everything you can to wring an appointment out of those first couple prospects you call, or to move through your list quickly and focus on ending the day with the most total appointments? So the new rule is to think of your cold call list in the aggregate and to maximize the number of total appointments you set. So one important way to give yourself the best chance of success is to reduce the amount of time you spend researching individual prospects before you cold call them. Instead, if you group prospects according to industry or some other category that makes sense and focus on the top level challenges and priorities that are likely to impact prospects in those categories, that's going to allow you to dive into cold calling more quickly and maximize the amount of cold calling time you've set aside that you're spending on the phone with prospects. And an important distinction here is we don't discount all research. Research before an appointment is clearly valuable. Some amount of research about an industry is valuable, but spending hours researching each prospect before you call them is going to take away time that you're spending on the phone. And then another way to make the best use of your cold call time is to become more skilled at qualifying prospects in real time, which incidentally is another thing cold calling can help you do. So it comes down to being able to identify when no really does mean no, as in the prospect you're talking to is not a good fit for what you offer. And this is a tough one because, as I mentioned earlier, rejection and resistance are baked into cold prospecting. So even really good prospects will start out by resisting because they haven't yet perceived the value of making a change. So have a plan that helps you uncover the real no's as soon as you can, so you can move on to and spend more of your phone time with those potential yeses. And of course, not every no will be a no forever. So just because you're moving on to a prospect who's more likely to say yes now, you should have a plan for follow-up to those who might say yes later. And this is the kind of efficiency I talked about earlier that's designed to ensure your hard work doesn't go to waste. So your prospecting time is finite. You want to make the most of it. And during that cold call time, you want to be on the phone speaking with those highest value prospects. And that's where your effectiveness comes into play and can generate real results. Deborah, did you have anything?
When you're planning your next step and your prospect has given you enough no's that you want to move on, don't ask your prospect if you can call back in a month or next quarter or in 6 months. Ask your prospect, since things change, when would you like me to follow up? And be quiet. Let your prospect give you the timetable. It's often sooner than you might think.
Right, and that's actually a good segue. So we've covered some efficiency tips, and now I want to talk a little bit about focusing on what your prospect wants and needs, and sort of letting those top level imperatives guide what you do when you're on the phone. So this next rule is one we talk a lot about at BusinessWise, and it will be familiar to those of you who have attended some of our recent insiders sessions, and it's don't sell your product. And it's really the most fundamental rule of cold prospecting and value-added sales across the board. Because one way to squander a valuable opportunity is to go through all the trouble of trying to connect with your prospects and then talking about how great your product is. So the old rule might be sell the prospect on the benefits of your product. The new rule, and it's critical, is focus on what your prospect wants and needs and sell the benefit of an appointment. Because the main thing here is that it's very likely that your prospect isn't even close to thinking about buying anything when you reach them via a cold call. So of course, they're going to default to resistance. And this is a major reason why you should focus on selling the appointment rather than selling your product or service. When you try to sell your product to a new prospect, you make your job a lot harder than it has to be. First, you make a small decision into a big one by forcing your prospect to think about a big, complicated buying decision to justify taking the appointment. Second, and along those same lines, you give them a reason to say no by allowing them to say, I'm happy with the way things are. Not thinking about buying anything new or changing. And finally, you immediately put yourself on a different level than your prospect, because you're talking about your product or service and they're not remotely thinking about buying. So even if you manage to reach your prospect and get their attention, you don't have it for long. You only have a short window to move the conversation forward. So here are some ways to think about the value of an appointment, so you can get your prospect to yes before that window closes. The three basic premises are you're offering free insights and knowledge, the opportunity to brainstorm about problems and solutions and to gain new ideas. It's no strings attached. So even if they never become a client, there's no commitment beyond the meeting. And it's a two-way street. It's there to benefit both of you, to brainstorm about what might work and what doesn't. And so you both come away with something valuable. So here are some specific ideas to think about how to offer value in an appointment. Do you have information, trends, or ideas that you might share with a prospect who is not interested in hiring a service like yours or switching vendors? More specifically, what has changed in your industry over the past year or in your prospect's industry that a prospect who has the same old vendor might not know about yet? Think about resources you offer to your current clients that you might also be able to offer to prospects. And then a helpful way to think about it is, how would you answer if a prospect asks, why should I meet with you if I'm happy with my current vendor? And you'd be surprised, there are often some really good answers. And just to recap with a few key points, this is about what they want, not what you want. So prospects are focused on their problems and priorities. Again, don't make your job harder than it has to be. Focus on what's attainable, and what's most attainable is that next step, the appointment. And then if you think of the process like a ladder, with the sale at the top and the cold call at the bottom, you can see that you're not going to climb the ladder in one step. So focusing only on that next rung is important. In this case, that's the appointment. Deborah, did you want to add anything here?
I think these are completely important points, Sam. And if you think about the first appointment you're going to have with your prospect, if it's all about asking them questions about them, or if there's nothing that you can offer except information about your products and services, you haven't done your homework, because you've got to come up with things that you can, ideas and insights that you can give to your prospect. And once you know that you have these valuable ideas or insights or information to give to your prospect, then the job of selling the appointment becomes much easier.
So that brings us to our final new rule of cold calling that's related to an aspect of cold calling that gets a lot of attention, and that's scripts. And our strong recommendation is to scrap the old script, by which we mostly mean it's not a matter of reading the right words off a page or screen and then magically setting appointments. So the conventional wisdom about cold calling scripts is actually evident from the word script itself. A script is something that you learn, memorize, and recite. But your cold calls are not one-way performances. Your prospect didn't buy a ticket to hear you talk, so you really don't need a script per se. Instead, you should aim to be situational, flexible, and conversational, to be agile, to ready to respond to whatever your prospect says with something that reinforces your value. And sales prospects are never going to have any confidence in you if you sound like you're reading from a script, but the words you use obviously matter. And some words or phrases are more effective in certain key situations than others. So if you think about the idea of talking points versus a script, scripted language is not supposed to be read like a script. It's supposed to be language that you then take the time to learn so you can better finesse your response to each prospect. Politicians and lawyers and executives use these more flexible and situational scripts all the time, but they probably more often refer them as talking points. So a good process you could use is the one I've laid out here: brainstorm, write, absorb, and deploy. Think about whether you already use talking points in your cold calls. Ask your peers what they use, search online for ideas, and write everything down. Take the time to be more deliberate and thoughtful about those words, phrases, and questions you use. And maybe even add a list of common questions and objections, that you typically hear during sales calls. And then you can absorb those talking points through regular role play and practice on the phone with actual prospects. So that instead of reciting a script, you're deploying a talking point confidently, competently, and with your own unique personality. And we have a separate session where we dive into the scripts that we've used at BusinessWise over the years. So look for that in a future insider session. But shifting the frame from scripts to talking points, I think, is a really useful way to think about it. And the final point is that it's good for both new and experienced sales reps. Even if you're happy with how you deploy scripts on your cold calls, it's always important to revisit, revise your language on an ongoing basis. And then finally, the concepts here are that cold call script is pretty outdated and unhelpful as a concept. Whatever you call it, focus on mastering your language rather than letting it master you. Second, again, a cold call is an interaction, not a recital. So get your prospect talking, listen, and be prepared to respond. And then finally, practice is really key to ensuring that whatever words and phrases you decide work best for you, you deliver them confidently and effectively. And role play is something that I think most sales reps don't love to do and aren't eager to engage in, but it can really help if you do it on a regular basis. So we highly recommend it. Deborah, did you want to add anything about scripts and talking points?
We do practice what we preach at BusinessWise. We have a weekly, what we call clinic, where we do practice and sharpen our skills. Years ago, it was one thing to practice while you were cold calling, because lots of people would answer the phone. We know that that doesn't happen today. So it's really important to be practiced when you do get that connection and your prospect answers the phone. So I can't encourage you enough to role play and practice at your companies, with your colleagues, or with other people you'll meet today in your breakout rooms.
Thanks, Deborah. And I know this was a lot. We covered sort of some wide-ranging aspects of cold calling. Here's just a few suggested questions to guide discussions in the breakout rooms to sort of tie everything together. Think about how many cold calls you make on a regular basis. Oftentimes, the reason cold calling doesn't work for sales reps is because they don't do it often enough. Do you use it in combination with other prospecting strategies? How and in what order? Think about your list. Do you call every prospect in your target market or just a smaller subset, and why? Do you use scripts? I'm sure you probably use them in some form, but where do you find them? What works and what doesn't? Again, what are the most common objections you hear from prospects? How are you prepared to respond? And then these last three are about offering insights that are valuable to your prospects to give them a reason to say yes to an appointment, even if they never become a client. What do you know about your prospect's business that they don't? What forces will shape your client's future success that you can help address? And then again, why should a prospect meet with you even if they never become a client? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. In a moment, we'll head into the breakout rooms. At that point, you'll be able to unmute yourself, and there'll be a little bit of shuffling at the beginning as I make sure that we have all the right wise guys in the rooms. So just bear with me, and if you could be patient and let our lead wise guys introduce themselves, that would be great. But thanks again, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you in the breakout rooms. Hey, PR, did you get my...
I was originally in Cynthia's room, and then it kicked me to Deb's room, and there was like me, Gene, and Scott, and Deb in there.
Yeah, I moved Scott, so you should be able to go into Deb's room now. All right, here, let me...
Can you send me to Cynthia's?
Sure. Hello again to everybody, and welcome to our August session of BusinessWise Insiders. Before we get started, just a quick overview of what you guys can expect today. First, I'll walk through the presentation, during which I'll keep everybody on mute just to minimize any inadvertent disruptions and keep everything moving. Presentation should last about 20 to 25 minutes, after which we'd normally divide into breakout rooms, but I think we'll just take everyone off mute and have one big group discussion today, given the smaller number of attendees. And at that point, you'll have a chance to introduce yourself and ask questions or offer your own perspective on some of the ideas we'll cover today. And obviously, you can avail yourself of our full slate of wise guys representing our three markets: Atlanta, Charlotte, and Dallas-Fort Worth. So with that, why don't we jump into the topic? So today we're going to be talking about the idea of sales crutches, how and when and why sales reps use them, how crutches can help you engage with prospects, and more importantly, for today's presentation, how they often can hurt your effort to engage prospects, set appointments, and build relationships that lead to sales. Before we get into the details, let's just start with a quick definition. So what is a sales crutch? And the way I'm defining it here is that it's a go-to script, question, or tactic that sales reps rely on to help them engage with a new prospect. And crutches can present a real challenge for a variety of reasons. Some of them are just natural tendencies that might align with your personality or way of doing things that can make you more comfortable interacting with strangers, which is what a lot of cold B2B outreach amounts to. And it's not easy to break those kinds of tendencies, so that's one challenge. But even more challenging, many sales crutches are actually the result of years of sales training and have become part of the sort of conventional wisdom of B2B sales today. And many of them represent a holdover from the way sales used to work. So even as the world of B2B sales has changed and shifted, sales trainers have been teaching these scripts and tactics for years without questioning whether they're still relevant or even smart. In full disclosure, a lot of the approach that we push here at BusinessWise relies on some of these same kinds of tactics. So this presentation is an opportunity to examine some of these tactics and learn together about how to use them in a smarter way. And all of this is to say that there's nothing inherently wrong with using a sales crutch as we've defined it here. And in fact, scripts, questions, and tactics can be helpful as long as you have a strong foundation built on the idea of providing value to your prospects. But if you're not careful, falling back on sales crutches can actually shift your focus away from that critical idea and give your prospects a reason to say no, which is obviously the opposite of what their intent is. And a lot of the ideas we'll cover today came from a blog post that I recently came across called "How Would You Sell Without a Solution?" It's by a sales expert named Anthony Iannarino, who runs a blog called The Sales Blog. And if you're not familiar with him, I would strongly recommend that you check it out. And I'll be sure to link to the article in our follow-up email to today's attendees, so keep an eye out for that. And one of the reasons it caught my eye is that in an insider session from a few months ago, we discussed what it means to provide value to your customers at every decision point, particularly at the very beginning of the sales process when your prospect isn't thinking about buying, can't ever imagine doing business with you, and may not even know they have a problem worth fixing. And at the end of that presentation, I posed a question for consideration and discussion. And that was, if you couldn't offer your product, how would you help your client achieve better results? So today we're going to try something similar, keying off of Anthony Iannarino's blog post. So here's a thought experiment. Imagine you are meeting with a new prospect in an industry where you have a record of helping companies improve their results, but you couldn't use any of your go-to sales crutches. So specifically, the rules are you can't mention your company, you can't ask personal questions or attempt to build rapport with your prospects, you can't mention your products, and perhaps most challenging, you can't ask questions about your prospects' pain points. And a couple of quick points before we start. We're going to take a closer look at the specific sales crutches listed here, why sales reps use them, why they might hurt your effort to set first appointments. But remember, this is a thought experiment designed to get you thinking about what motivates prospects to act and how you can do a better job of encouraging that action. Obviously, it would be unrealistic to expect any sales reps to avoid using these crutches entirely. The point is to be smart about how and when you use your crutches so you can be sure you're focused on demonstrating maximum value. And before I dive into the individual sales crutches, Deb, did you have anything you'd like to mention at this point?
Well, certainly, Sam, I agree that the world of B2B sales is changing, and some of the ways that it's changing has to do with the principles of consultative sales, which are valuable to all of us, are not enough anymore. And in addition to being consultative salespeople, we really need to be value creators at every stage of the sales process. So the first sale that we're making to everybody is to try and get our prospects to commit to the time to meet with us. And it's, as y'all know, it's not easy. And I hope today's presentation will help you think about it in a little different way.
Right, and I think, regular insiders attendees know we really hammer home that point of providing value at each decision point, even if somebody doesn't become a client. The hardest thing is, so often when our minds go to how do we provide value, we think about our product and our company. And in reality, the value you provide has very little to do with those things at earlier stages in the process. So that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. So the first crutch is your company. So it's probably the simplest and most straightforward. It's the fact that you are representing your company as a starting point in an interaction with your prospects. So if I start off a cold call or email by saying, I'm Sam Mitchell and I'm with BusinessWise, I'm immediately falling back onto that first crutch. So let's first look at why the crutch helps. So first and foremost, it establishes credibility by identifying who you are and who you're representing. If your company has a relatively well-known and easily recognizable brand, that's even better. And that in turn can be an important tool in building initial rapport with a prospect. And finally, it puts the focus on your solution, which at the surface, what your company offers is where you want to eventually steer your prospects. But here's the other side of the coin. First, at the very beginning of the sales process, your prospects really don't care about your company at all. They care about their company, and they're going to measure the value of the interaction in terms of how and whether their company will benefit from the interaction. So in fact, mentioning your company can have the opposite of its intended effect by adding a sort of friction and giving your prospect a reason to resist. So even if your prospect has never heard of your company, the mere mention of it can start your prospect thinking, have I ever heard of or done business with that firm before, shifting their attention away from the value that you're offering. And that's really an important point. Both you and your prospect should be focused on the value you're offering. You want to be focused on it, but you also want your prospect's attention focused on it as well. Too much reliance on who you work for and who you're representing serves only to distract from that really singularly important concept. And just as an aside, some of you may recall that we recommend using a cold call script that we call the double handshake. And one of its core features is that it intentionally excludes any mention of your company and clarifies that you and your prospect have never met, since the goal is for your prospect to be entirely focused on the question of continuing the conversation. And so for each of these sales crutches, I've put together a trio of questions that I think can help you thinking about why it's a crutch and what you're really trying to get at. And the first question you should be asking yourself, as Deb alluded to, is what decision is your prospect making at the moment you're interacting with them? In a cold call or cold email, the decision they are definitely not making is whether to do business with you or your company. So usually the decision they're making is much simpler. Should I open this email? Should I take this call? Should I continue this conversation? Should I agree to another meeting? And since that's where they are, that's where you should be. So ask yourself what information would help them make a better decision, and then how can you provide that information? Deborah, did you want to add anything?
So our prospects are not taking our class for the most part. And they're going to probably resist a different way of handling things. So when you try to talk about some of the value that Sam's going to talk about later, don't be surprised when your prospects go to their old crutches and start asking, well, how much does it cost? Or why are you different than my current supplier? But don't get sucked in. And keep in mind where you're trying to go and what your goals are, and help the prospect align with the value that's important for the decision of them committing to spending time with you.
So moving on to the second crutch, and this one is one that most sales reps really pride themselves on and probably the hardest to shake. It may be even sort of the first place you try to go when things get difficult. What if you weren't allowed to use your rapport building skills with the prospect? What if you couldn't ask personal questions or use your warm personality to create a bond with your prospects? And of course, rapport building is a huge part of sales, and with good reason. Rapport building fosters likability, familiarity, and unity, all of which can help nudge a prospect who may be on the fence toward a yes. And we've talked about those concepts in combination with a few others in our presentation on psychological triggers that encourage people toward action. But most importantly, rapport building can really lay the foundation for a relationship based on trust, which is where you're trying to get to in any sales relationship. But at the end of the day, your prospect doesn't make decisions based on who they have the best rapport with. And sales reps who rely too heavily on rapport building can fall into a few traps. First, striving to create rapport can mean that both you and your prospect are getting too comfortable when the real objective should be honesty, which isn't always comfortable. Value is most likely perceived when you're challenging your prospect to think about things in a different way, which is outside of a comfort zone. And conversely, if you care too much about whether your prospect likes you or not, you may not be willing to be honest with them. And then finally, those warm and fuzzy feelings don't really provide any actual value to your prospect's business. Ultimately, they need substance in addition to rapport. So here are 3 quick questions that can help emphasize why you need more than just rapport to motivate your prospect to action. Does your rapport building make you unique? Does your rapport building serve your prospects? And then more importantly, what is more valuable to your prospect, your personality or your insights? And again, fortunately for all of us with winning personalities, we get to use our rapport building skills in the real world, but rapport with substance is essential in today's sales environment, and more powerful by orders of magnitude than rapport without substance. Deb, did you want to add anything before I moved on?
Go ahead, Sam.
So let's move on to maybe the crutchiest crutch of all, which is your product. And we all love our products. We pour our hearts into them and really believe they can solve all our clients' problems. And with the right customer, with the right problem, they can. And we've seen it a million times. That's why we get so excited about talking about it. But when we're prospecting, talking about our product lets us provide those specific details about our solution. And it also lets us talk about the thing we know best, which makes us feel more confident and authoritative. And finally, it's the main thing that differentiates our companies and what we offer from our competitors and what they offer, because no one has a product or service exactly like ours. But the downsides of focusing too heavily on our products are pretty significant. You've heard this tune before, but talking about your product puts the focus in the wrong place on you, your company, and your solution, when what your prospect really cares about is their own challenges, priorities, and goals. They care about their bottom line and how to grow it. Perhaps more than anything else, talking about your product centers the conversation, again, on a decision that your prospect isn't currently making or even thinking about, which is whether to buy. So when you force them to decide whether to buy from you by talking about your product, rather than to decide whether to keep talking with you at the beginning of the process, you're sort of teeing them up to say no, because they're not even at the point where they're considering the value of buying. And it's why one of our new rules of lead generation has always been to sell your prospect on the benefits of an appointment rather than the benefits of your product. So you think about what I'm doing, my new product is my time with me. I'm going to then sell them on the features and benefits of that rather than the features and benefits of my product. So what are the benefits of an appointment? Here are a few general frames you can use. Prospect says, what's in it for me? First and foremost, free knowledge, the opportunity to brainstorm about problems and solutions and to gain new ideas. Another benefit is that there are obviously no strings attached. The appointment is there whether or not they become a client. So they get anything, they get valuable information without having to pay a cost other than their time. And then that it's a two-way street. When you frame it as not just seller buyer and that both parties benefit from an open and honest discussion, they're more likely to see it as a level playing field. But if I had to boil it down to 3 questions, here are the ones I would encourage you to think about and answer for yourselves. Why should your prospect meet with you even if they never buy from you? What value do you yourself add to the buying experience? So in other words, what does your prospect get out of working with you toward a decision rather than working by themselves toward a decision? And then more specifically, what insights, ideas, and experiences make you unique? Something about what you've done and what you know is different than what anyone else can bring to the table. And finding it and sharing it is what's going to set you apart. Deborah, did you want to add anything?
When your prospects pause and think about something you've said or asked, and they respond, gee, I'm not sure, I haven't thought about that before, you need to pat yourself on the back, because that is bringing value and insights and a new way of thinking. And if you are prepared with those kinds of insights in terms of, it could be the economic conditions or the political conditions or something psychological that's going on today, and help a prospect think about something that's going to be important to their business in the next 12 months. Those things are wonderful and don't just come up by shooting the breeze. These are things you need to be thinking about yourself, reading a lot of information, not only about your business and your prospects' business, but the general business community. And you need to be talking with your colleagues, coming to insiders, sharing these ideas, because this is what's going to spur your prospects in realizing the value that you bring to them.
Yeah, and I would just add that, it's obviously important to learn as much as you can outside of your regular sales experience about what's happening in your clients' industries and your own. But a lot of this you already know because you work with clients in certain industries, and you probably know that industry inside and out better than even your clients do. And you certainly know your own industry better than your client does, and have seen what's changed, what's new, what's different. Those are all things that you can share with a prospect that will potentially shift his or her perspective about where their company is going and what challenges they'll face. And actually, this is a good segue to the final crutch, which is questions that are designed to elicit information about your prospect's pain. And I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that this is especially challenging. It's really interesting because it's probably going to go against a lot of what you've been told by professional sales trainers and what you may have even learned in previous insider sessions. But let's start with why these kinds of questions can help. First, they put the focus on your prospects and what they care about, rather than you, your company, and your product, which is important and a key difference between this crutch and the previous three I've covered in this presentation. Second, questions get your prospect talking so you can listen and react, which again is very important. And then finally, getting your prospect to open up about their problems can help you to begin to gently lead them toward your solution. So these are all really good things on the face of it. But while questions are undeniably important, the wrong kinds of questions, the wrong time, actually won't help all that much. First, it's not a differentiator in today's B2B sales landscape. Almost every sales rep asks these same kinds of pain questions, which makes it hard for the prospect to discern any real value from any individual sales rep asking them. Second, and this is really important, questions like, what are your current challenges, or what keeps you up at night? Focus on problems that your prospect already knows they have. So you asking about them provides really no new information. And that's really the key here. Questions about your prospect's pain give you information. They are more valuable to you than to your prospects. If you've ever attended a previous insider session where we covered our 7 key skills of master sales hunters, you may remember that we talked about identifying a prospect's pain as a key differentiator between successful sales reps and mediocre ones. It's not just about discovering pain, it's about anticipating pain, both current and future, that your prospect may not even realize they have. So here are a few questions to help you think about your questions. Rather than thinking about asking prospects about their pain, think about what you can teach them about their pain. And then for every question you ask, double check. Is this designed only to gain information for you, or will it also help change your prospect's perspective? And Anthony Iannarino, the author of the blog post, suggested asking questions like, What is your perspective on the trends that I've just told you about as they pertain to your future results? Which trend do you believe presents the greatest challenge for your organization? And then following up with a question like, what initiatives have you already put in place to address these challenges? What initiatives are you considering to protect your company from negative consequences in the next 12 months? So asking questions about the information you provide rather than what they already know. Deborah, anything to add here?
Well, Sam, as you were saying earlier, all of us are familiar with prospects' pain because many of them become our clients. So if we take those experiences and suggest something that's been a concern to many of our clients is A, B, and C, which of those resonates with you the most? That's giving information rather than just asking for some, and may help people look at things in a new light. So again, as you were saying, Sam, we know most of this stuff, we just forget to do it.
Right. And part of the purpose behind this thought experiment is to get you thinking about those things you already know without having to use some of these crutches. And I've encouraged you to think about a number of questions throughout this presentation. Of course, you'll be able to access the complete presentation via our insiders group on LinkedIn, and I'll link to that in our follow-up email. But here are a few more questions, some from the presentation and some new ones to help spark discussion when we open up the conversation. As you can see, the 4 on the top correspond with the 4 crutches we've talked about today. So if you couldn't mention your company, how would you establish credibility? If you couldn't offer your product, how would you help clients achieve better results? What questions can you ask your prospects to change their perspective? And if you couldn't ask personal questions, how would you strengthen trust? And then the 4 on the bottom, take it a step further and ask about the most meaningful ways you can demonstrate value in every prospect interaction. What do you know about your prospect's business that they don't? What forces will shape your client's future success that you can help address? What changes should your prospects make? What changes shouldn't they make? And then this last question, what crutches do you use and how can you use them to help provide value to your prospect? This one's important because, again, every sales rep uses crutches. Every sales rep mentions their company and product, asks questions, and seeks to build rapport, and that's all fine and good. The lesson is not to stop using crutches, but instead to avoid becoming overly dependent on them and to be smart about how you use them to motivate your prospect to action.